Alright guys, so to remove the wheel, it's going to be a 17mm socket. The sensor itself, guys, sits right there, so all you do is you just wiggle it back and forth from the other side, like that, and then it'll actually come apart. It sits in these grooves that you see right there. Alright guys, to remove the, so this, where the brake pads are, the caliper, this is the bracket, so the pads sit inside here. So to remove it, it's going to be an H7, 7mm. So what I did was just to take a small little breaker bar, makes it a lot easier, and then it goes right in there. And then what you're going to do is basically push down that way, this way, it's going to loosen it. And then there's also one on the bottom. Okay, so at this point we're ready to install these new pads in the caliper. So instead of taking the brake grease and putting it all over this whole caliper, the only place that it'll come in contact with is around these mounts with the piston. So what I'll do is I'll put a little bit of grease on here for the slides, on the edges, and then on the actual pistons themselves on top, you'll put some just lightly on top of the piston where it comes into contact with. You could also put a little bit of grease here on the mount itself and on the top bracket to allow it to move freely. Okay guys, so once those two bolts are removed, you simply wiggle the caliper off of the bracket itself. Since we're not replacing the rotors at this time, you don't need to remove the bracket, but if you were to replace the rotors, I believe that's a 5mm or 6mm hex, and one right there as well that you would have to remove. The pads sit in this configuration here, dual piston caliper. Then there's also the wear sensor on the back. Okay guys, so what I like to do is when you're installing the top pad here, if you see, what I do is I don't put the grease on the actual top part of the pad itself. I put it on the bottom part of this caliper underneath. That way when you install it, you have a nice clean look. So you have a little bit of grease on the edges, but not too much. That way it's not just going all over the place, and it looks somewhat decent. So then I'd put also a little bit of grease here where the pad is going to come in touch with the caliper mount. You got to make sure that these slide very freely. So I'm actually also going to put a little bit of grease here, 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 and here. So all the rust, basically all I did was you take some sandpaper. First you sand this side, then sand the other side, then sand here, 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 finally here, and the inside part. And then for the actual rotor itself, you get something a little bit finer, and then do the same thing on this side and on the other side as well to get all that rust off. And then use some brake cleaner. For the sensor, for the depth sensor for your brake pads, you can just take some WD-40, spray it on there, and clean this up. Make sure there's no dirt or anything on this part where the shiny part is, because then you won't get a reading. If you still don't get a reading after you put everything back together, potentially you could need a new one. Hey guys, in order to remove this air filter, cabin air filter, so what you do is you simply unclip. There's going to be a clip right here, which is that right there. This will get you this 13mm It's just a 90-degree turn, 13 millimeter. This comes off. Then you're going to have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then you're also going to have a Torx T25 right here. You're going to pull this piece out, which sits right here first, and then pull up from there, and it'll actually slide up. It'll give you access to your brake fluid right here, and then you got to use the .4 brake fluid we're using. So .4 brake fluid by ATE. We're doing the Type 200, which is supposed to be better than the regular ATE brake fluid. But it's right here. Loosen that up. So last thing here, here's the 2 pins that hold the 2 bolts that hold the caliper. What you're going to want to do before putting these in is you're going to put a little bit of brake grease on top here, just very lightly, not a lot. And then after that's in, then you can put these back in. Make sure they're very clean too. What I did was I just used some WD-40 to clean these guys up real quick. Put a little bit of grease on here because you got to make sure that the caliper slides freely back and forth. Otherwise you'll have what I had before when they didn't do that apparently, and then the caliper started, the pistons, you know, they couldn't move the pad correctly in and out, so it was like at an angle, which was causing very low to no contact on the inner edge here. Okay, so the caliper should slide on very easily. There's going to be barely any clearance between the pads themselves and the actual depth or width of the rotor rather. And then as you can see, there's your depth sensor. So all it is it measures the distance. Where's my hand? Here it is. The distance between here and the rotor. And once that comes in too close in contact and actually starts making contact with the rotor itself a little bit, as you can see there, it'll throw a warning on your dash. Before putting anything back on together, rinse everything off one more time with brake cleaner, both sides, this side and the other side. And then also we're gonna wash the inside of our wheel as well. It's a good time to do that. Couple last things here, guys. To put this cover back on, the easiest thing to do is to have 2 people. First you put in that tooth and then this tooth here, and then after that's done, press down here, and then what you'll do is you'll take a screwdriver, slightly lift it here, and it'll go in one there. There's 2 teeth that'll go in on both sides. The other thing I recommend you do before you put the wheel on is you just clean it inside, rinse it down, and then also what I did was I sanded down this surface here. That way there's a nice clean contact point. There's no rust. There was some rust buildup around here. It's a nice contact point to the rotor. It looks like BMW original pads on this vehicle. They've got about, I would say, 1 mil of pad left, maybe 1.5. That was also a good time to clean all this rust off the caliper. I'm guessing this issue was caused by the slide bolts being dirty and without the lubricant. And we're also going to clean this rust off of the hub so we have good contact to the rim. And we're also going to clean this caliper. So now is a good time to do that. Alright guys, so in this case we're using Brembos for replacement of the pads. Just wanted to show you a quick comparison. They're identical to the OEM ATE ones. Just want to show you the part number. P06066N is the part number for these. And then Here's the new pad and the old pad. As you can see, similar design, but they don't have these grooves here. A little bit more braking area, and then look at that thickness. Barely anything left in this pad. So as you can see, there's these springs that go inside the pistons, and that's how the caliper sits on that side. On this side, it's just these two brackets on each side, and all you do is just push in on these brackets and then out and down. It'll come out. Alright guys, when you compress these pistons in, you have to be very careful not to ruin the seals. So when you have this in place, go very slowly. Open up that top bottle, and you could also do the other method, which is there's a bleed screw on the other side of this caliper, which you would just slightly loosen, and then as you're pushing the piston in, brake fluid will come out. After that, you'll have to do a full bleeding brake procedure, since there will be air in the system. So just be very careful when you do this. Do one by one. You could also put the pad on top and do both, but in this case this isn't big enough to do that.